of the Business and Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. We're conducting this meeting virtually in accordance with the COVID-19 orders in place across the state. The agenda includes instructions for the public to listen to the meeting. This meeting will be archived on the web afterward and will be available via link to the Commission's website. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Judy, will you please call the roll?
I will. Commissioner Sisnett.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Chairman Griscom.
Here.
We have all commissioners on the committee present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. And let me welcome Commissioner Patterson for joining us today as well. We're glad to have you, Terrence. So I'd like to welcome the Commission's first Executive Director, Tess Stovall. Tess, we're glad that you could join us today. We know you're transitioning from a current job with the State Department of Education and the State Board. And we really are looking forward to having you as our Executive Director as we prepare to actually take over a lot of the functions at the beginning of the year and to help us sort of sort out some of the issues that we know have to be worked out before we're set up and going to work. So Tess, thank you. And let me ask Eddie and Derwin, if you all would like to say something before I bring Tess on for her to share some thoughts with us.
Hi, this is Commissioner Sisnett. I know we worked with Tess just before this moment, but I'm certainly encouraged and excited for her to be joining in this official capacity. And so also offer my welcome to you, Tess, and Tennessee will be grateful for it.
Commissioner Smith?
And, you know, I called Tess last week afterwards and congratulated her. And Tess, looking forward to working with you. I did preempt for all of us, and I called Sarah Morrison to make sure that Sarah wasn't gunning for any of us, and Sarah is not. She's happy, so we are glad to have you on board.
Thank you all for your comments. Tess, let me now ask you if you have a few words you'd like to share with us.
No, I just want to thank you all again for this opportunity. I'm just really excited to dig into the work. As you all can imagine, I've started my commission to-do list that as I keep thinking of things, I write it on a piece of paper as I'm trying to kind of wrap up the work of the state board, and looking forward to really digging into a lot of great work moving forward. So I just appreciate the warm welcome and just really looking forward to working with you guys in the months and years to come.
Thank you, Tess. And again, welcome. We are so glad to have you coming in as our Executive Director. So today's agenda is a discussion of potential office space, our budget, and the Commission's possible meeting calendar for the remainder of the year. Today's discussion will inform revisions to each of these that will be brought to the Commission at a later meeting. Are there any comments about the agenda? If none, do I have a motion to approve?
This is Commissioner Sisnett, so moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Commissioner Smith?
It would help if I would unmute while I was talking. Eddie Smith, I'll make a second.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? If not, Judy, please take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Sisnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
3 of 3 have voted in favor. The agenda is adopted.
Thank you. Before we get into the agenda, everybody has been sent the minutes from our meeting on July 8, 2020. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
This is Commissioner Sisnett, so moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Eddie Smith, I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Judy, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Sisnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
3 of 3, the minutes are approved.
Thank you. And again, Tess, let me just say I'm glad you're here because the items we're going to discuss today, I think really we'll be looking to you and working with you as we move forward. My understanding is that within the Department of Education, have actually are giving back some space based on a lot of the things that are changing and the way we do business and a lot of people working at home. We had looked at office space a couple months ago. Eddie, Commissioner Smith went with Eve to look at some space. And I think one of the conversations we'll have today is, in light of what Department of Education is doing, is just being able to look at it. We will not necessarily make any decision today, but to look at our space now with that notion of, do we need to sort of maybe revisit it in light of who you may or may not need to have coming in as you put our staff together. So with that, Judy, may I turn to you for the conversation?
Absolutely. I'm hoping that you can see the screen with the office layout on it. Can you tell me if you're able to see that? Great, thank you. So you'll see outlined in purple here, this is the 5th floor of the Davy Crockett Tower, where the State Board of Education is currently located, in the Davy Crockett Tower. And this is the space that we had previously identified as available and serving the needs of the commission. The purple outlines the specific space we are focusing on right now. It is a change from the previous version because we had identified 3 additional cubicles to the left, which would be 5.109A through C. And now we have cut those out for a savings of about $6,000. So the space that's outlined in purple ends up coming to an annual rent of $57,442.50. That is without 5.109A through C. And what you're seeing here, you have 6 cubicles, which are 5.107A through C, 5.105A through C. So 5107 and 5105A through C. Those are 6 cubicles. The office to the right of 5105, which is numbered 5.103, that would be the executive director's office. There is a small conference room to the right of that, and it's labeled 5.101, and that would be deemed the designated office space for the executive director, right next door. What you see as 5.12A is currently sort of a receptionist cubicle. The thought is that that would be taken away and there'd be 2 waiting chairs put there. What is labeled as 5.100 is deemed to be the commission's general counsel office. And what is above that at 5.427 would be the deputy director's office. All of those offices have closed door capacity and file room capacity. What you see across the way, 5.416, it looks like there's a table and chairs. It's actually a big file storage room. It is smaller. It doesn't look like it on this picture, but it is smaller than the room which is above it, 5.414, and that would be a conference room. It has a screen there, and it is capable of seating 10 people. Then you see a sort of a rectangle in the middle of the hallway. Those are filing cabinets, and they provide additional storage, which we could conform. If somebody had a public record search and wanted to come in and look at our files, we could use it for that purpose. So if you count the 6 cubicles and the 3 offices, this has adequate space for 9 individuals. It has a small conference room dedicated to the ED, a large conference room that the whole team could meet in, and file storage room and additional file storage capacity. The rent that I mentioned, the $57,442.50, covers things like a share of the restrooms, the kitchen, labor, and furniture. So that's it's not just merely here's your space, but it covers the common areas. Also, to our knowledge at this point, it gives you access to the large conference room on the first floor, which does have streaming capabilities, which we believe is at no extra charge. That is being confirmed. That's basically what we know at this time. We do not have documentation yet. I do want to emphasize, and this is, I really would love Tess's input on this, especially about the space. Once we commit to the space, this is a unique thing, I guess, with state buildings, but there's no fixed term for the lease. We have the space until we can find our replacement. So until another agency can backfill it, we are committed to paying for that space. And I guess that's a common state building provision, but I hadn't been familiar with that before. So it is a major commitment that we need to keep in mind. I think in light of COVID and the new normal, maybe going forward, I think we need to think hard about, do we want to commit to this much space? Are we considering maybe some individuals coming in some days a week and sharing space or not? So these are kind of things that we might want to think about before committing to the space. And I'd love to invite discussion at this time.
So Tess, may I ask you to sort of just give us your broad perspective, knowing that you really haven't had much time at all to sort of look at this, but what are your thoughts based on what Judy just laid out? And just so that we benefit from your initial reaction to the space, and whether you feel like that we ought to at least consider reducing some of it.
Yes, thank you. I do think that we should think about reducing some of it. My initial gut reaction is, do we move from 6 cubicles to 3 cubicles, kind of to the point, Judy, of could that be somewhat of a rotation system? I think the one question I would want to explore before we do that is, let's say a year from now, we realize we actually need those additional 3 cubicles. How easy it is for us to, assuming there's no one else in that space, to get those additional cubicles. The additional thought I had was, I don't think that it is a requirement that the executive director have an additional meeting room. And so wondering if could we make, I guess, 5.101 an office rather than the executive director's meeting room, and cut down on one of the additional offices that we've allocated.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, you have walked the space. Can you share your thoughts?
Yeah, so when we looked at all of this, again, we were looking at it in a post-COVID world, realizing that right now, yes, things may look a little bit different, but let's fast forward 8 months, assuming that, if everything holds true, we've got a vaccine in late November, widespread distribution by March. So things will probably start returning to old normal, not new normal. So I agree, and this is completely Tess's call. I mean, the original plan, based on just all the I guess, the norm within state government is that the executive director has a conference room. If she doesn't feel that's necessary because we have a meeting space already that we can use, then could we look at getting rid of one of those bigger units? Most of that floor is empty, so from 5.109A going to the left all the way through there, all of that is empty at this time. I do know that another department, and I think it was DIDS, was looking at moving onto this floor as well. So I don't know how much space they might end up taking that could limit us if we give up space now for growth into some of this in the future. So those are just, I think, some discussion points that we need to have with DIDS before we just say, yes, let's give up those 3 cubicles, because we could lose those permanently, and then we would have to look at moving completely to another office space if we realized we needed more space in the future.
Commissioner Cisnet, let me ask you for initial thoughts you have.
Yeah, so I think I want to preface this by saying I don't want to now that we have an ED, I want to be mindful, what the ED wants and really her vision, what Tess is for this. I think the big hesitancy is around the commitment. That is unusual. I spend time in the real estate space, and that is a first for me. Not to say that aren't going to always be first, but that is very unusual. And that does seem like it boxes us into a contract that is pretty significant. And so if we ever did want to downsize or move, we'd ultimately have to wait for someone else. So we'd almost have to act as a real estate broker or agent to find someone to replace our spot. And it just seems like a lot of work. So I don't know. I think the one thing is maybe to at least look at a smaller space that we could start with, so that it is more palatable. But again, really thinking about what Tess thinks is best for the team, and going forward, how we can still have the agility we need without being locked into a space.
And Tess, I think one of the important things for us to make sure, and that is that if you come back and say, yeah, I think we could reduce this at this point, that we still have access to that large conference room on the first floor for our meetings. So if you have to have this much to be able to have that access. And I mean, I think what both Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Cisnet have said is, as you look at the staffing and the people that you feel are important to bring in, as you build out your team, is to put this in there. And your point, yeah, we could probably, maybe get rid of half of the offices we've got and just figure that out, pieces like that. But I would not. I mean, I think the direction you're getting is we're not sitting here and saying you must do this, but I think anything that you can look at that works with the team you're putting together, and we accomplish the things that we're set up to do. But if there's a cost savings, because as you know, we've already got a 12% reduction. So I think anything that we're able to pick up that we could then move into another area for the Charter Commission is just helpful. And what I would suggest is that knowing that you are, I mean, I know what your start date probably is going to be, but I'd like to ask you if, Eddie, if you and Derwin agree, would you put this on what's going to become a growing list, which and then share back with us, even if it's, probably before our next committee meeting, but I think this ought to be one of those items. But it'd be good for us, if you are there, to be able to share, here's my thought when it comes to space. I think where we are right now is still a good space to have, but we'll still have the conference room access. But I do think we can maybe reduce part of this as we set up. But that's Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Cisna, does that make sense to you as an approach?
It does.
Yes, it does.
And Tess, let's ask you, does that sort of fit with what your thinking would be, and being able to sit down and really look at this space and then share back with us what you think would work?
Absolutely. And I think, Judy, I think the question for you is, I know there are a few questions that we want to get. For me, I'd want to have answered before I would be prepared to kind of come back. So maybe figuring out some time where we can talk to the stream people together, or whoever is the point of contact, so we can get clarity, would be really helpful.
Absolutely. And to answer one of your earlier questions, that small conference room identified as 5.101, that could, I asked the very same question. It could be used as an office. It is a smaller office. I don't know that this drawing is exactly to scale, but it definitely could be used as an office. And I imagine the 10-person conference room isn't going to be used all the time. So if you wanted to use that for your personal conference room from time to time, that would be available as well.
Hey, Tom, can I ask a quick question of Judy? And sorry, my brain is a little fuzzy on all the details. What was our original budget for office space in versus what we're looking at cost-wise here?
Chris Reynolds, you may want to pipe in on this. I think we had originally estimated it at around 35,000. That was before we got our numbers. Chris, can you correct me on that?
Yeah, so the actual budget that exists currently does not have any dollars whatsoever for rent. It was overlooked in the budget. There was only two items in the budget. There was labor and there was professional consulting services. That's the entirety of the budget. The draft budget that we discussed at the last meeting, I believe I had put 35,000 in that Judy mentioned. I'm going to double check that right now. The current version that I've thrown together just has a placeholder in there of 55, but we're already down to 10 months out of the year for max. So I think I had to say 35 to 40 is probably a reasonable number, but bear with me and I'll find out what the ballpark number was 6 weeks ago.
And to Chris's point, there isn't a rush right now to move in. And so, part of the discussion may be when we actually would want to start this lease. And that could be a cost saver as well.
At that point, Judy, Tess, would you add that to your list when you share back with us? When would you like to be able to physically move in and have this space? Because we know as you build out this team that y'all have to have a place that you're working, and I don't expect all of it's going to be virtual. So that would be helpful to us as well.
Sure, absolutely.
The rent number that I had placed as a placeholder in the July meeting was 50,000 even, just for information purposes.
And does that answer your question?
It does, but I guess where I was going is, and Eve, I don't know if Eve is on the call or not today. When we had met, she had given me a number that we were trying to get under. So that's why, because originally this space called for a lot more than even what's in purple here, and we had reduced that down because we were trying to get, that's where we felt like we could have some of our biggest cost savings. And I agree. I mean, we don't know if we're going to need to move in November, December, or maybe sometime probably in the spring. So I think just let, Tess get her feet, right now she's standing at the base of a dam and we just opened all the floodgates. So, give her a life raft and give her a chance to figure out when, she thinks that staff's going to be brought on, when they would need to move in, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, I think that's great because we know we need to, we need to at least get a shape for a budget, which we get ready to move to in a second. And then part of that clearly, is the timing piece so that we know if we're deferring some costs, but at the same time, if we recognize at some point that full, expense is going to be there. So it's a good point. Any other discussion here? Judy, thank you for
I will say, Chairman Griscom,
yes.
The amount of square footage this represents is 2,553 square feet, and it's priced at $22.50 a square foot. And that is a reduction from the original proposal, as I mentioned, which had 3 additional cubicles.
Yes. Thank you.
Tom, may I make a
Judy?
final? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, go.
Well, and again, here's a question that we can probably ask of the committee that, the people that do all the building services. Looking at if we give up 501(7)(a) through C, can we ask for a first right of refusal on that?
That's a great
so somebody
proposal.
else is looking at it, they come to us and we have first right of refusal.
Yep.
That's a good point, Eddie. Thank you. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Tom. To Derwin's point earlier, the idea that you are accountable in perpetuity for the lease unless you can find a subtenant or a replacement tenant is kind of ridiculous. But I want to say though that in a startup, I mean, this is a startup entity, and Tess is going to lead us through that. But we are not a startup entity in the sense that under the statute, the commission is in fact a going concern. And so while I share Derwin's reaction, I think all of you probably do as well. The commission itself by statute is a going concern, and I don't imagine it's going away. And so I just share that to maybe soften kind of the reaction that I know Judy and I had when we learned of this lease structure. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Chris. Are commissioners ready to move to the next topic, which sort of is a natural flow from this, and that is a discussion of the FY21 budget. Is everybody good? If so, Chris Reynolds, let me ask you to lead us through this part of the agenda, please.
Thank you, Tom.
And with a note, but the last time we talked about it, you know, we then knew we were going to have a 12% reduction. So we started looking at some of that impact. And I think, again, Tess, for you, we wanted to make sure that we got the executive director in position, because this clearly is something where we're going to be looking a lot for your input as to where, you know, I mean, we had a pretty good discussion about positions and things of that nature. So again, thank you for being part of this so that we can hear back from you as to your thoughts on the budget priorities that are here. So with that, Chris, let me turn to you.
Thank you, Tom. So as everybody knows, and if you're looking at the document that's in there, at some point prior to my involvement with the commission, there was a budget approved that evidenced $951,000 in revenue and $840,000 in compensation costs and $111,000 in professional services for a break-even budget. That is what exists currently. Under the governor's order or departmental recommendations, 12% reduction would equate to an $84,600. It's a little less than that. We've rounded it. Reduction. It only applies to the recurring funds. There is some additional state funding that is not subject to that. And so the new budget is $867,000 in terms of sources or revenue. The expenses in this proposed budget here, and again, this is for discussion only, we'll modify as necessary. Evidences a reduction in compensation costs down to $587,000. And the reason for that is there was no budget items for commission meeting costs and travel and lodging related to that. There was no costs for staff travel to visit schools and do site visits of applicants and or authorized schools. There was no line item for rent. There was no line item for supplies and computers and office setup. And then we have pushed some additional funds into an unclassified or miscellaneous category just to provide Tess with some budget flexibility. We tried to keep these as low as possible. We have reduced those from the July 7th version substantially. You may recall there was over $40,000 in meeting costs. There was about $30,000 in staff travel. Rent was $50,000. It's now $55,000, which we'll bring down a little bit based on Judy's commentary a minute ago. And then we got a placeholder in there for some computers and miscellaneous costs. So I feel pretty comfortable that we're in the ballpark there. We might tweak it a little bit. Our responsibility as a committee and as a commission is to reduce $84,000 out of the sources line and adjust for that on the expense side. Right now, it's showing a $30,000 surplus, and I think we would want Tess to involve herself in whether she wants to push that money into labor, into professional services, into other areas. And in a longer term approach, I think it would be prudent for the committee and the commission, given the unique nature and independent status of the commission, to pursue through the governor and or the legislature the ability to retain that recurring funding if it's unspent and carry it forward to other years. I know that is not typical in a departmental financial function at the state, but given the independent status under the statute of the commission, given the startup nature, to restrict the commission's operations to a 12-month recurring interval really doesn't fit the nature of an organization that will be growing its own revenue stream and strategically planning for its growth. And so I think in the medium term, the committee and the commission may want to consider that. That would produce significant flexibility. So I just wanted to make that recommendation. I'll stop there and take questions.
Commissioner, if you know what, Tess, may I get your initial reaction to what Chris Reynolds just laid out, please?
Sure. I think my initial reaction is generally, I think this seems like the right reductions. I think one question I would have as I get in is kind of understanding how much is what we call in state government speak above the line or below the line. Above the line being salaries and benefits, where you really don't have flexibility. You can't bring above the line dollars below the line, if that makes sense. So cost savings and personnel can't be moved down below the line. But you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to below the line expenses, and that would be like those professional services, meeting costs, et cetera. And so I think what we kind of coming into the role would really want to understand is what is the total below the line that we have budgeted, such that as we get into the work, as we can, know that we need some setup costs, we can move some of those line items around that we're able to do, as opposed to those personnel costs where we unfortunately don't have as much flexibility.
Thank you. Let me add a couple points that I would like to again call on Commissioners Smith and Cisnet for your thoughts and comments. Tess, when we looked at this and we looked at meetings, and we're going to come to that because we will get closer to what I'd say the normal for meetings. That we've done a lot of meetings, which I really appreciate all the commissioners being involved in this year as we set up. But if I recall, our conversation was for a lot of the committee meetings, we would like to stay virtual. I think for our commission meetings, I think we're all longing for the time when we can get together again in person and actually have that, those type of meetings where we can interact with each other. I think there is a real benefit to when you're actually able to interact in person and have side type conversations, things like that a Zoom type meeting does not necessarily facilitate. But that I think is what I remember as we talked about looking forward for meetings. We also had a conversation, careful, to your point, that we didn't leave money sitting on the table. And if you came in and said, I don't need all these positions right now, that we made sure we didn't lose the money. So if you decided down the road we needed to do it, that I recall is another conversation we've had. So with that, Commissioner Smith and Cisnet, let me turn to you all for thoughts and comments, please.
I'll let Derwin go first if he's got anything. I know he's on a bit of a delay.
Let's start. So I think maybe just going backwards, I really like the idea and hadn't thought about that around what it means to, potentially downsize, operations needs, even facilities needs, it's always harder to go back up. And so while, we're certainly talking about trimming where we can trim, I do think it'll be difficult down the road, particularly as, the budget gets cut and we know in the state things lag behind. And so the current crisis we're experiencing, we really aren't experiencing it to the full depth and breadth just yet. And so what does that mean for, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when, Tess needs more people on her team and, she's now fighting for, to get more money in the budget. So I do wonder, without sort of inflating things, I wonder how we can, park certain dollars in places that we may need to access and feel good about that, but also knowing that we have flexibility of moving that to another area, whether it's personnel or facilities. And so I know we're working on trimming, but maybe we should sort of, not trim too much. And I know, Chris, when we were in the charter space, what it would mean to just cut here or there. And then you wake up the next day and you want to add it back. And it's too late because you've already expressed that you don't need so much. And I would hate for us to be in that position.
Yeah, so here's a couple of questions. What is the exact date in the year 2021, forget fiscal years for a second, but the exact date in the year 2021 where we will assume full authority over the schools that are already, the charter schools that are already out there, and what percentage of the authorizer fee will come to us? I think right now the state board is at 3%, if I'm correct. Does that 140,000 represent that 3% authorizer fee, or is it a lower percentage for the fiscal year 22 budget?
So the commission is able to take 3% of the authorized charter schools BEP. That 140,000 is a low budget amount. I think I'd have to go back in my email quickly, but right now I think the state board is collecting about 270,000 in an authorizer fee for fiscal year 21. In the next year, the schools will be increasing enrollment, so I think you can assume that's going to go up. The other thing that you asked was, when does it assume, when do we take over those responsibilities? And that is July 1, 2021. So when you're looking in fiscal year 22, you will have that additional revenue stream of the authorizer fee.
So can we go ahead and adjust that 140 to the 3% that the state board, actually use the state board number that they're receiving now, because that'd be $130,000 more. Now, that doesn't close our entire deficit, but it does cut it significantly. That way we've actually got a real number that we might be needing to go to the governor and the General Assembly with, of helping to cover that cost.
Yes, and Chairman Griscom, as a point of clarification, or there are a couple things here. First of all, the major cuts to salaries and benefits were a result of the fact that we were already into this fiscal year and we're just now bringing on our ED, and we haven't brought on any other staff other than one administrative person. So those are the pro rata numbers based on our estimate of when individuals would be hired. So I'm not sure Tess knew about that, but that's how we got to those major cuts on the salaries and benefits. As to Eddie's point on the other revenue, the percentage that the state board is currently getting, I absolutely think we can increase that number. And in fact, and Tess can hopefully speak to this more, there are 5 appeals going on right now, which could result in additional fees if more schools are under the authority of the commission starting next July 1.
And if I could just, Commissioner Cisnet, if I could add to that, I think if, while this is just 1 year, I think if we look at even the year before, we're starting to see or not even starting, there's a trend that's happening in terms of more schools being denied by the local authorizers. And so even in the case of Shelby County, this is the first time they denied everyone. And in all my years in Shelby County, the last 15 years at least, that hadn't happened or hasn't happened. And so I wonder what it looks like moving forward and what does that mean for the workload that we'll have and thinking about that.
No, thank you. Both those are great points, and that's something I mentioned to the chair last week, is that we do have 5 appeals happening right now by the state board. All 5 of those appeals are coming from a district that has a priority school. So even under the state board statute, the state board could be the authorizer. And so certainly we expect that those appeals from a timeline perspective will be wrapped up mid-September. And, you know, depending on what those decisions are, that could drastically impact the work of the commission, even as soon as, you know, school year 21-22, if we have potential of opening additional schools. So I think, you know, we'll have to just kind of, to a certain extent, wait and see. And I think the good news is that those decisions are going to be made here probably within the next month. So we'll be able to really understand from a staffing perspective. I don't think it would drastically change the staffing perspective, but, you know, certainly if you're looking at 3 additional schools on top of the 4 that are currently authorized, we're really going to have to think about the allocation of roles and responsibilities.
And, you know, the other thing that came out of our meeting back in January when we were all, or February when we were all confirmed and we actually met, you know, Tess, one of the things you might want to also do is sit down with Commissioner Schwinn, because I know there was talk about looking at moving some of the ASD schools over and trying to get a good idea of what that landscape may look like if districts don't take them back, and what we might be looking at in schools that we would be assuming at that point. And I know that's kind of forecasting, but all that could start happening in that fiscal year 22 timeframe.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you.
So, Tess, from your perspective, and again, I'm just going to add another piece in here. We just did it a minute ago. What is your feeling? I won't hold you to this, of the amount of time that you'd like to have, and then share back with us and with Chris Reynolds, who's very involved in this, so we could look at probably a closer version of what a budget we'll be looking at. Do you think you could have something by, say, the mid part of October or so? Would that give you enough time?
Absolutely, because I think that will allow the state board appeals to be through. That will allow me to get on board and dig in a little bit further. And I also think that we will at that point really know what the landscape is going to look like for school year 21-22. I do have one question, and this is something that maybe Judy or Chris could have insight on. Has the state or any of the administration given us a target date by which we need to identify these costs by?
Tess, that's a very good question. We had hoped to have our budget in place and a proposal to the full commission at its August 26th meeting. I don't know that there is no one's informed me of a specific deadline. I mean, we do have, I guess, a preliminary budget in place, but we're obviously, due to COVID and the speed at which we're ramping up, going to revise that. But I haven't been told that you must have a budget in place by X date. I think the preference was sooner as opposed to later. So we have the August 26th commission meeting, and then the next meeting is at the end of October.
Yeah, and that's the reason for asking Tess how you felt if you had enough time to do it, because as a commission, I think the reason we chose to press forward and make the selection for executive director and to defer the budget at this point was so that you had the opportunity to look at it, align it with what the staffing decisions, things like that are going to be done, and that if pressed, we'd have that conversation back with the administration, the decisions that we made. But yeah, we asked, that if we were moving down the path, which we were, and we were getting ready to select an executive director, to not, we have, as Judy said, Chris worked on, we got sort of a placeholder, but to allow that executive director to really come in, look at it, align it with the team, and then come back so we could approve it. So that is the path that we were on.
So can I ask a question? Can we, because I don't want to confuse, and can we ask Tess just to only right now look at the fiscal year 21 cuts for a recommendation for next week? Because the fiscal year 22 has to go through the entire process with sitting down and doing the governor proposal. That one can be kicked to October. I just don't know that the fiscal year 21, so kind of separate them out. Give her a chance to say, when does she think that some of the staff, all of that for the fiscal year 21 to see, can we move on that fairly quickly to do those recommendations, and then give her till October that we can discuss the fiscal year 22, because that's what will have to go before the governor and the F&A team for inclusion in the next budget year.
Good question. So Tess, let me ask you, you're going to be in the driver's seat. Would that work?
Yes, I think that is very reasonable.
Eddie,
Yes.
did you, in your comment, did you indicate that there's some sort of a state deadline for FY22 that might be in October? Did I hear that right?
Well, I know historically, state agencies start putting their budgets together in August, September, October. Last year, they had meetings with the public hearings were in November when all the state agencies actually presented their next fiscal year budgets to the governor. And then there were legislative hearings that happened in December. So the fiscal year 22 is when all of that would happen. So let's just say November, December timeframe with governor presentation and legislative presentation. So that gives Tess the time in October to make sure that our presentation of what we're going to request in the next fiscal year is together. But early on, right now, she's only focusing on, are the cuts we've made to this current budget year we're in right now, do those make sense based on where we are and where we need to be over the next now 10 months?
Okay, thank you very much.
I would just ask,
Go ahead.
have you heard that that schedule is going to change this year based on COVID of that November, December timeframe for all the hearings and things?
I have not heard specifically one way or the other, but my expectation is that we should just go ahead and be working off of that timeline and just be prepared with a FY22 budget, at least a budget presentation, so that we are ready to go whenever that process is going to begin.
Okay.
Sorry. Other questions or comments? This has been a good discussion. Tess, I think directionally, they provide you the background that you need to move forward.
Yes, sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman Griscom, may I clarify, is the intent that we do bring forth the FY21 budget to the full commission at the August 26th meeting?
Well, that is what Commissioner Smith was suggesting, and Chris Reynolds has been working on it. Let me ask Tess, do you think you have enough time between now and our meeting next week, commission meeting, to at least indicate that you're comfortable with where we are looking for FY21? I think the big part of it, as you're thinking, Tess, I think the biggest question in my mind looking at this is probably the facilities piece in here is going to go down, but we'd have something to work with there. I'm not sure. And then if you're able to look at and get a sense that in the salaries line, you know what's there. Do you feel comfortable of saying, yeah, we can work with this right now to finish out 21 and have something that we could approve at next week's commission meeting?
Absolutely. I think we're in a good place. And I think also, kind of thinking about how we continue to revisit the budget over this next fiscal year, particularly knowing that we do have the flexibility to move between line items in that below the line budget. So certainly as we're getting, I think really solidifying, okay, what are going to be the personnel costs? And what are we identifying as below the line cost items? And then knowing that we are inevitably going to have some shifts, particularly in that below the line. But as long as we know this is the big target that we're shooting for, I think absolutely we're in a good place, and I will have time to dig in just a little bit further, but we can be ready for next week.
So Commissioner Cisnet and Commissioner Smith, are y'all comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, so I guess if we need a motion, what I would say is that we move this budget to the full commission with feedback on any minor changes that can be presented to the full commission by Tess next week.
So I've got a motion, Commissioner Cisnet. Will you second?
Sorry.
Any other discussion? Because I think that, thank you, I think that does leave Tess working with Chris the latitude to move some of the numbers in the line. So with that, Judy, may I ask you to call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Cisnet,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
The motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. So Chris Reynolds, are you okay with where we are at this point too?
Yes, sir, I am. Judy, could you restate the motion that was approved? I'm assuming we are going to seek a commission approval of the FY21 budget in August, if that's at the end of the month, if that's what I heard correctly.
Right. The motion was to submit the budget for FY21 to the full commission with minor changes that Tess may recommend.
Sounds great. Thank you for confirming.
Okay, so Chris, we're going to stay with you and we're going to talk about the meeting calendar.
Thank you, Tom. I've included in the packet for the meeting a revised meeting budget, which also evidences the calendar for the commission. You'll notice there is no committee meetings because the assumption is they will be virtual for the remainder of the fiscal year through June 30, 2021. The commission meetings had been operating on an every other month cadence, and we have now moved them after the October and December meetings to a single meeting in Q3 and a single meeting in Q4 with the exact date TBD. Obviously, we're going to want Tess's guidance on that. I also think, given the appeals that are looming, once September occurs, Tess will be able to better advise us on which months will make the most sense for the commission to meet, and or if there needs to be additional called meetings to support that authorizing activity of the commission. And I'll let her speak to all of that in a moment. She can see around the corner better than any of us on that. Mechanically, though, the Rules and Policy Committee adopted, or the commission adopted, a policy back in February that indicates the commission will set its meetings by October 15th of each year. Given the current circumstances, I think that's highly unlikely, given the meeting in October is at the end of the month, after the 15th. So I discussed this with Judy and Chanel, and Chanel's recommendation would be that the commission in the August meeting motion and approve to suspend the policy and either temporarily or until it's amended to technically provide the commission time to wait until October to set those dates. And that would produce compliance with the policy by having a motion to suspend it. And then two, it would provide Tess the opportunity to help me structure the future meetings based on the additional information that'll be learned in September. Let me stop there.
Oh, and Chris, just to clarify, so the commission does have that policy of October 15th, and they do have the ability to suspend different policies by majority vote. But I did want to make sure, like, I hadn't seen any other provision that would require that October 15th date, but Tess, you might know what was behind that thinking. I don't know if it was just the commission decided that date or if it's set forth elsewhere, if it's based on something else that might, some other timeline. So Tess, I don't know if you have anything to weigh in on that.
My belief is that it's not set anywhere other than commission policy. So there's no statutory requirement other than, regular notice. So I do think that the commission could waive that provision until the October meeting.
Great. That was my thinking as well. I didn't see it anywhere else, but I didn't know if it may be aligned with something else that goes on, that it might be more appropriate to keep the date. But yes, Chris, with that thought in mind, I think that they could vote to suspend that October 15th date.
Thank you, Chanel.
So, Chris, thank you for that report. You and I have talked about this offline a couple of times, if trying to figure out. I think, again, with the ED in place, it's helpful to plan ahead. I would really like, again, Tess, I'm not dropping another one on you, I hope, but for your input on looking at our schedule. And I mean, the virtual part of this, is to me, is has been trying to figure out, what are we looking at as we head into next year? I think it's fair to say we probably are going to try to get to what the normal rhythm was going to be, and that's quarterly meetings of the commission. And knowing there are going to be some, I'd say, called meetings where we have other actions we have to take, that those would just get dropped in as we go. But, in my mind, I think there are times where we probably would meet over a 2-day period, depending on what issues are out there. But I have been somewhat reluctant till we got the executive director in place to go ahead and lock in a schedule looking into next year, because there's a lot of unknowns, and have the benefit, Tess, of your experience as we look at this. So let me just sort of lay that out, and now again ask Commissioners Cisnet and Smith for your comments and reactions, please.
So my biggest issue, I guess concern looking at this, there's 8 weeks between the August 26th and October 28th meeting, but only 4 weeks between the October and December. Again, just trying to think and not knowing all of the schedule of what November and December could look like. Would we be better off to waiting until after Christmas, say on December 30th, to have that third meeting on the list, which is also a couple of weeks before the legislative session starts, so that we've kind of got a better game plan of what we might need to be going and talking to legislators about. It's after all the budget hearings and everything else, just thinking strategy-wise.
Yeah, Commissioner Smith, let me give you one reaction from my time on the Board of Regents, because there was always a December meeting, but it was more toward it was before you got into the holiday period. So it was toward the, say, third week in December. And my question to your point, I agree with what you said, but do we do it right before the holidays really start, not knowing what they're going to look like this year? And so that we are still behind when we're going to have the hearings of the governor, and it's before the session comes back. So I just shared that experience from the Board of Regents of moving their date to the mid part of December, and but not during the holiday period.
And hi, this is Commissioner Cisnet. I'm less familiar with the legislative calendar and just how things move in that regard. I just know from, it just seems like the world, and obviously things will be different now, or might be different now, but it seems like the world stops right before the holidays. But there, I think early December might be too early. Late December or mid-December is probably the right time to really squeeze in everything we need to get done in advance, because then everything just goes dark. And I know from just my own experiences, it just gets it gets aggravating, the amount of people that just go away when you really need to get some things done. And I fear that there will be a lot of things that we want to get done that we might wait until the new year, but ultimately it would have been better if we got it started right before the holidays kicked off. And so again, the context is I'm not sure how the legislative calendar works with that, without those assumptions, but it just seems like I think we're better off at least trying to get as much as we could get done before the holidays.
And my thought would be like December 16 and 17, which are just to have those. We may not need both of them, but to have that, which is the right before you would enter the holiday period. So it's 2 extra weeks from what's here right now.
And I would feel better about that than December 2nd, just again, not knowing when hearings and everything else. I just don't want us trying to have a meeting and it's the same day that Tess could potentially have to be in front of the governor, not knowing what that schedule is going to look like yet. I just know that December 2nd fits in that very tight window that under both Governor Haslam and under Governor Lee, that a lot of things are happening.
That's a good point. So Tess, may I ask your thoughts on what we're discussing?
Absolutely. I would say that I think a mid-December meeting sounds right. I was just doing a quick calculation around when the commission might be hearing renewal appeals in 2021, as well as new start appeals in 2021. And so what my recommendation will be when it comes to setting 2021 calendar year meetings will be to really anchor a kind of a mid-spring meeting where we're going to say that's when renewal appeals are going to be coming, because from a statutory perspective, we know the deadline there. And then anchor another meeting sometime in mid-September when we know we're going to be hearing new start appeals. And then from there, build out the calendar for how do we fill in the other meetings. But I think for now, I think this is a good recommendation, and that it'll set us up well for 2021.
Thank you. So Commissioner Smith and Cisnet, in looking at the calendar, December 16 is a Wednesday, and the original date, December 2, is a Wednesday. So we might suggest that we move that date of what Chris has put together for us and substitute December 16 in the place of December 2, if you all are good with that. And then what Tess just shared with us, we'll sort of let her sort of work on the additional dates moving into quarter 3 and 4. But we could go ahead and get these dates locked in. August 26th is already there because we're meeting, but get the 28th and the 16th, if you all agree, put before the commission next week and get those locked in as dates that we can all plan around. Does that make sense to you all? And then Chris Reynolds, let me ask you, does that make sense to you?
This is Commissioner Cisnet. It makes sense to me. Yes.
It does me as well.
Okay, Chris?
Yes, sir. It makes sense to me. And I might also add that just from a compliance standpoint, to Chanel's comment earlier, we should probably make sure the commission at the end of August approves a motion to suspend the policy to buy us the time to incorporate Tess's feedback on the calendar.
Okay, so what I would suggest, we probably got 2 motions. One of them will be to set the calendar we've just talked about, and the second would be a motion to suspend the rules so that we have that extra time to put these, to give Tess the ability to work out the schedule going into the balance of the year. So if that is agreeable to Eddie, with you and Derwin, I'd ask for two separate motions, if I may. And the first would be to set the calendar we've got right now with the dates that are here, and recommend those to the commission next week to approve.
One quick question, and this is for Chanel. Chanel, did our policy state that we set the calendar on the fiscal year or on the calendar year by October 15th?
Yeah, I don't know that it says either way. I looked at that. I can pull it up really quick or get back to you on the August 26th meeting, but I don't recall that it says either way.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because we've got to make sure we bring up the, I think we need to have justification, and if it's based on the calendar year, obviously by October 15th, we're setting the rest of this calendar year. So that's why I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to set the whole next calendar year on October 15th.
Yeah, Commissioner Smith, that's a terrific observation. And I have been looking at the actual policy. It's on the commission's website. It is unclear, and I would recommend that the Rules and Policy Committee amend this to be specific with the language that clarifies it. So it is unclear as it's written. It'd be a simple amendment that we might want to look at later. Just want to confirm that.
So yeah, so back to your question, Tom, I'll make the motion of whatever it was you said a second ago. I'll make that motion. And you're muted.
This is Commissioner Cisnet, and so moved. Or second.
Okay, let's take this one at a time. So Eddie has now moved to present the first three meeting schedule, and it looks like we've changed December 2 to December 16th.
Correct.
And make that recommendation to the commission, the full commission at the August 26th meeting, and Derwin has seconded it.
Right. Any other discussion? Judy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Cisnet.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
The motion is approved.
And then we had a second motion, and I'm trying to remember now where we were. I think the second one ought to be to make a recommendation, Eddie, building off your point, to Terrence's committee to go in and clarify in the rules, that our meetings, how our meetings are going to be set. And so we all decided, do we want them on a fiscal year, or do we want them on a calendar year? Tess, do you have a preference?
I typically think about things in calendar years. Most of my brain lies in fiscal years, but I think when we're thinking about setting out 4 meetings a quarter, I think everybody's brains, at least I'm assuming, it makes more sense to think about it from a calendar year perspective. So it would be my recommendation that we move forward in setting like the calendar year as opposed to fiscal year. But certainly we'll defer to the will of the commission on this.
Thank you. That is how TBR did set them up by calendar year. I'll just share that with you all. So if I can get a motion that's to ask our rules committee to consider a policy that would set our meeting dates based on a calendar year. Can I have a motion to do that?
This is Commissioner Cisnet, so moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
You do, from Eddie Smith.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Judy, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Cisnet.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
The motion is approved.
There was a third one. I remember, I looked at my notes, and that is to ask for, to suspend the rules so that we are able to have the appropriate amount of time for our executive director to look at our meeting schedule going forward and to be able to I'm trying to think of it, to suspend the rules so that we have extra time to set the calendar for the balance of the year. I think I've got that right. So do I have a motion for a suspension of the rules?
Eddie Smith, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
This is Commissioner Cisnet, second.
Thank you. And I do think, Judy, that in Tess, and Chris, I said that right, that we want that suspension of the rules so we have the ability to consider looking at meeting dates and we're not bound by the October 15 date. So, okay. Any other discussion? Judy, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Cisnet,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Thank you. Now, Chris Reynolds, back to you. Is there other discussion on the calendar part of our agenda today?
You're on mute, Chris.
Excuse me. Thank you. No other discussion other than to indicate that the budget that we will review, that Tess and I will review, does include an assumption that the Q3 and Q4, which on a calendar basis would be Q1 and Q2, would be in person. And so we've included some funding for that. And that funding also includes an increase in the technology cost per the prior commission discussion. Again, that's just purely for notification to all of you. But all that will be worked out with Tess.
Thank you, Chris. I saw that in the materials that were sent out, and we can hope we get there. But it's good planning for us to have planned for that rather than have to come back behind. We can always adjust it back the other way. So thank you for that. So Commissioner Smith and Cisnet, now Derwin, if you're enjoying where you are, we can keep going for a while longer. But hey, thank you all, because we've done a lot of work, had some good discussions at our committee meeting today, and I would turn to and ask you all: is there any other topic or conversation or questions that either one of you have before we move to a motion to adjourn?
Well, I don't know if Terrence is still on the call, but is there anything else we can send to his committee?
Yeah, and Derwin says, since you were there in Memphis, just tell Terrence when you see him or whatever that we're just thinking about him. Want to keep him busy.
I sure will. I'll send it through the wonderful air.
All right. So, Tess, is there any thing else that you'd like to share with us? And again, let me just thank you. Looking forward very much. We've already got you working, so we appreciate it. But any last thoughts you have for us today?
No, it was a great conversation, and just really looking forward to keeping the work moving forward.
Thank you. And Judy, to you and Chris, again, thank you for your continued good work in supporting us. It's always appreciated. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
You got it. Judy, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Cisnet,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Griscom.
Aye.
We are 3-3. Motion is approved. We are adjourned.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
When we get there.
You too.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.